Yes.
Okay.
So yeah, I'll let you know. And hoping I got the password right. I think I did. Yeah, so we're about to be live. Okay, so we probably should go ahead and the intro slide.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending this year's Distinguished Lecture Series hosted by the Dean Scholars Student Association. The Distinguished Lecture Series is an annual campus-wide lecture that invites outstanding individuals to speak at the university on unique and relevant science topics. Our past speakers have included Nobel laureates, a National Medal of Science recipient, and a Pulitzer Prize-winning author. My name is Sruthi, and I'm so proud to be the co-chair with Sarina for this event. The Dean Scholars Student Association is a student-run organization affiliated with the Dean Scholars Honors Program within the College of Natural Sciences at the University of Texas at Austin. Thank you so much to all of the Dean Scholars who helped make this event possible. Please note that tonight's event is being hosted by the Dean Scholars Student Association, a sponsored student organization. This is not an event sponsored by the University of Texas at Austin, and therefore the views expressed tonight are of the student organization and invited guest speaker and do not represent the views of the university or its officers.
We're extremely honored and excited to introduce Dr. Bernard Harris Jr., a retired astronaut, clinical scientist, and flight surgeon at NASA. Dr. Harris is currently the CEO of the National Math and Science Initiative, which aims to improve teacher effectiveness and student achievement in underserved communities across the country. Dr. Harris earned a bachelor's degree in biology from the University of Houston, a master's in medical science from UT Medical Branch at Galveston, a master's in business administration from the University of Houston, and a doctorate of medicine from Texas Tech University. Dr. Harris worked at NASA for 10 years, where he conducted research in musculoskeletal physiology and space adaptation. He developed in-flight medical devices to extend astronauts' time in space. He has logged more than 438 hours and traveled over 7.2 million miles in space. In 1995, Dr. Harris became the first African American to perform an extravehicular activity, or spacewalk. He has received numerous awards, including the NASA Spaceflight Medal, NASA Award of Merit, and the 2000 Horatio Alger Award. Without further ado, we are honored to present Dr. Harris's lecture entitled An Astronaut's Perspective, Space Medicine to Telemedicine.
Well, Sarina, thank you very much for that great introduction. And Sruthi, thank you so much for opening us all up. And of course, Benjamin behind the scenes making it all work and happen. So I appreciate the time this afternoon. I'm really honored to be part of this. Too bad we couldn't do this face to face, but maybe next year we'll be able to be in each other's company. But in the meantime, we just have to take advantage of technology, which is something that I've been doing for a long time in my various professions. As you heard my introduction, I've been involved in a lot of different things. If I was there before you, standing before you, I would say that as I stand before you this afternoon, I stand as a physician, I stand as a venture capitalist, I stand as a philanthropist, and I stand as an astronaut. And I thought today that what I would do would be to share with you sort of my perspective of medicine from the standpoint of those different professions, by kind of sharing with you almost chronologically how I got involved in all of these different areas. And so I'm going to now switch to share my screen and see if this works, see if technology works. And good, I got a thumbs up. That's what I was looking for. All right, so as I mentioned, what I'd like to do is, let's see if I can get my slide to move forward. There we go. Is to talk to you from three perspectives, primarily from my time at NASA, being a flight surgeon, researcher, and also an astronaut. When I left the astronaut office, I started working initially for an aerospace company, a commercial aerospace company, and then later on got involved in venture capital. And so started a venture capital firm called Vesalius Ventures, and we'll be celebrating our 20-year anniversary this year. And then lastly, my work around trying to move forward math and science education. And so that is something that really is important to me, and I want to share that with you today. All right. So in 1969, we landed on the moon, and I was a 13-year-old kid looking at that little black and white television, wondering, what fun they're having, and I got excited about this notion of becoming an astronaut. And so when Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin stepped on the moon and said those wonderful words, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind," it was not only a giant leap for mankind, but for this little boy to consider following in their footsteps, literally. And so I set out a course to try to figure out how I would, become an astronaut. One of the things I did is I wrote to NASA and I tried to figure out what were the requirements. And they wrote back to me and said, you need to have at least a master's degree in some type of science or math field. And you needed to be trainable. You needed to work well in the team. And of course, being a 13-year-old, I didn't know what all of that meant exactly, although I was just enamored with this notion. When I got into high school, I realized that as I was preparing for college, that I could not go to college to major in being an astronaut. That was just not a thing. And so I had to pick a field. One of the things I learned early about myself is not only did I like space, but I also like helping people. And so around the same time, there was a guy by the name of Joe Kerwin, who was the first American physician to travel in space. And I followed him. He was a physician, did some research, and then got into the astronaut office, flew on board Skylab for 28 days. That was our first space station as a country. And so it was, I saw that, and that was my pathway to become an astronaut. So 1969, here's the view, that black and white photo, and, Apollo 11. And didn't that look like fun? Just kind of hang out there. So that led me to do all the things that you heard that I was doing. And I mentioned also that not only was I enamored with space, but also directed space medicine. One of the things I failed to tell you is that I was not only enamored with space, but space science and science fiction. And I was probably one of the original people who fell in love with Star Trek at the same time. And why are these two photos important? Because on the sci-fi side was a guy by the name of Bones, who was the physician on board the Starship Enterprise. And on the other side here was Joe Kerwin, examining one of his crew members real time in space. And you notice something different about examining an astronaut in space. If I was to have a patient here on Earth, I would say, hey, Mrs. Johnson, come here and have a seat on the table. But in space, because there's zero gravity, there is no need to do that. And I just simply say, hey, Joe, float this way and don't worry about turning around. And you'll notice that that's indeed what happens on Earth. So I finally got my chance. I was in the 13th class of the astronaut corps. And I always like to tell people, you look at us when we are astronauts and we think that we're all just, straight-laced and all that sort of thing. But we actually name all of our classes when we come in. And we were the 13th class, and so we decided to name ourselves the Hairballs. And you want to know why? It's because 13 is an unlucky number. We wanted to get away from that. One of the things that 13 is also associated with is a black cat. And what is the worst thing that a black cat can do? And that is a cough up a hairball. So guess what? We are called the Hairballs. We also have classes called the Escargots, for example, and a few others that are pretty fun. But in between having all that fun, we get prepared for going into orbit. And so you'll see again the Apollo, one of the Apollo missions where the astronauts jumping up, showing you that on the moon there's only 1/6 gravity. And then on the right side here is the space shuttle. So you've probably seen the shuttle lift off before, but you may not know that it weighs about 5 million pounds. In order to get that 5 million pounds in the air, we have to light 5 engines that produce a thrust of 7.5 million pounds. And when those engines light, you are leaving this planet in a hurry. So just as the engines fire and we clear the launch tower about 150 feet off the ground, we're approaching the speed of sound, 750 miles per hour. If you are lucky enough to be invited to watch a launch, you're sitting there watching the shuttle kind of lift off, and you don't hear a thing until about 14 seconds later, the ground begins to shake and then another 2 seconds, then you get the noise. And that shaking and noise comes from us going through the sound barrier close to the ground, and also just the pressure of the 7.5 million pounds of thrust pushing against the ground. And you think it's exciting from the outside looking at it 5 miles away, you ought to be inside. Inside, you get pushed back in your seat about 1.5 times G, 1.5 times your weight. And over the course of the first 2 minutes, we reach an altitude of around 100,000 feet and going a mere 2,500 miles an hour. And over the course of the next few minutes, in fact, another 6.5 minutes, we go from being pushed back in our seat 3.5 times our weight to 0 gravity in a split second. So this is a sequence. If you look at the top left, you'll see the shuttle in first stage just kicked off the solid rocket motors, which fall to the ground and recovered and reused. And you have the external tank that goes on into orbit. And then if you shift to the right, you'll see that when we get off of that external tank, it falls back into the atmosphere and burns up on the way in. And then the first thing we do is open up the payload bay doors so that we can put out our radiators and get ready to spend time in space. And so you'll see the Earth down below, the sun, you'll see a satellite that we're going to deploy, and the robotic arm there to the left. So here's our crew. Left side of the slide is the crew on the ground in our PR photos, where we have our different types of spacesuits demonstrated here. The orange suits are the suits in which we use to go into space and from space. Those are called launch and entry suits. They weigh about 120 pounds. And the suits at the top are EVA suits. You've already been introduced to that term, and that is extravehicular activity suits. They weigh 350 pounds. And so as you're looking at this slide, I know that you're probably saying to yourself, Dr. Harris, I didn't realize how strong you and your buddy in the back to stand up in a suit that's 350 pounds. And I could go along with that, Bruce, but I can't do that, because the reality is that as you see 6 people in this slide, reality is that there are 10 people in this slide, because there are 2 people holding me up and 2 people holding the other guy, Michael Fold, up in the back. And but it was still very fun to take this slide. Now, I'd like you, as I'm going to be talking for the next minute or so, to go from the left slide to the right slide, and that is the same crew on orbit. And if you go back and forth and look at our faces, one of the things you'll notice is that our eyes are puffy and maybe look a little small. Our cheeks are a little puffy. And if you look at Eileen Collins, which is the young lady right below me on the left slide with the short hair, if you go from on Earth to in space, you'll notice that she goes from this nice shaped hair to an instant afro, which is kind of neat, of course, indicative of being in a place with microgravity. Now, the puffiness and of our eyes and our cheeks come from a fluid shift. About 1/5 of your blood volume is in your lower extremities, held down there by gravity when you're on Earth. And when you go into space, that blood shifts up towards your head, and that extra fluid goes into the tissues of your face, and also goes into your brain. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. But that is the first symptoms and signs of what we call space adaptation syndrome. And that is the body's ability and requirement to adapt to a different environment, in this case, microgravity environment. So I talked about Eileen Collins's hair. Oh, and by the way, Eileen Collins is the first female pilot and commander of space shuttle mission, and one of my favorite people. But I also want to show you what happens to people who have long hair. And this is Marsha Ivins. Ivins has, I think, flown 3 or 4 missions, and every time she takes her hair out from the bun and just lets it fly. And people don't like to be around her here because even though this looks really cute with her hair kind of flowing backwards, that's abnormal, because in reality, the hair would be sticking in all directions, including in front of her face. And so you couldn't get anywhere near her because of the length of her hair. I love that photo. I love that. You notice that, see that devilish smile that she has on her face. So one of the things that I got a chance to do as a physician astronaut is to do one of the first telemedicine conferences from space. So I did my training at the Mayo Clinic in internal medicine, and I decided that they would be the recipient of a real-time telemedicine conference. And when I talked about telemedicine before, a couple of years ago, hardly anybody knew what telemedicine was. But since COVID has occurred, and the only way that many of you could see your physicians, if you went to your physician, would be through a conference call of some sort. And that's called telemedicine. So as we started that, NASA actually was involved in starting telemedicine, which is simply, assessing people and their health at a distance. Some people call it remote medicine. So I was able to do the first telemedicine conference in space. And what I was doing was also studying what changes occur to the human body. I remember a minute ago I said that something called space adaptation syndrome. Well, it turns out that big G, in this case G is gravity, affects every physiological system in the body, from the musculoskeletal system of losing 1% of bone per month on orbit, to losing 15% of your muscle mass when you're up there, because you don't actually need the density of your bones nor the size of your muscles, because to move around in space doesn't require many muscles at all. If I wanted to move from this side of the room to that side of the room, I simply just push my little finger and I would just glide. And so not much effort. I already talked a little bit about the shift in the cardiovascular systems. And not only is there a fluid shift, but the heart actually gets smaller in size. The immune system doesn't work as efficiently as it does here on Earth, again, because it was created in a one-gravity environment. There are changes in your vestibular system too, and that is, you probably went to the doctor where they hit your reflex tendon and checked to see if you have reflexes, and that's an indication of your neurovestibular system, and neuromuscular system. There's a change in performance, and then there are changes even at the cellular level. And when we did the twin studies a few years ago, we discovered that there also is changes not only at the cellular level, but at the genetic level. So the longer we live in space, guess what's going to happen? Our genome is going to change. And I always bring this up because just think about years from now, probably given your current ages here, probably your great-grandchildren or grandchildren who live on orbit will become Martians if they stay up there for long periods of time, because they will adapt and they will have a different physiology than we have here on Earth. So you remember all those movies that talked about the Martians coming to invade us here on Earth. Actually, the Martians indeed are going to be us as we adapt to those extreme environments. Because of all those changes, we have to do some things to make sure that our performance stays up, and that is exercise. So we actually have a treadmill that we run on. As you can see on the left here, it has a harness that he has to wear in order to hold him down to the treadmill. And then on the right is an ergometer. So I call it a bicycle ergometer, but there's no wheels, of course, on this. It's just the ergometer to give you the sense that you are riding on a bike. And again, it's another way of doing cardiovascular exercise. We also have a machine that teaches or simulates lifting weights, and we can use bungee cords or dial in the number of weight that we need that we want to exercise with. One of the things that we don't talk about very often is there's also a need to monitor our behavior, and mental health up there is really important. With the International Space Station, we have all types of folks involved, all ethnicities, all different countries. Here is the Russian astronaut from Japan, and American, and these crews change out every 3 to 6 months. And so we have to learn how to deal with each other up there. Now, with all those changes that occur in orbit, they're good and fine as long as you stay in orbit, but then when you come back down, then you're weaker. And so for the most part, when folks come back down, we don't allow them to walk. We actually carry them out or assist them out of the spacecraft and actually go through a rehabilitation program. So all of that is what happens and what we're dealing with life in space. So I want to switch now and talk a little bit about venture capital and why I'm doing what I'm doing. So I mentioned a minute ago that telemedicine got its start from NASA, but a lot of things got its start from NASA, from CT scans to computers to defibrillators for the heart and pacemakers to robotics. All started off because of some research effort that has gone on at one of the NASA centers. And let me just back up. And one other thing I was going to show, and I guess I missed a slide here, I was going to share with you as part of this entree into spin-off technologies, telemedicine was one of those things. And so because of my interest and work as a clinical scientist and researcher, I decided that when I left NASA that my focus in the investment side was going to be in telemedicine. And so next, you got a little glimpse of it. I don't know if you watched the Jetsons, but it was a big thing when I was growing up. And so I'm just going to show you a little clip that even some 30, 40 years ago, we had thought about how telemedicine can enter our lives.
I don't feel good, Mom. I think I'm coming down with Venus virus.
Venus virus, hey? Last week you said it was Martian mumps. Anything to miss the space calculus test.
I tell you, I'm sick. Oh, this is it. It's growing black. Quick, where's a pencil? I gotta make out my will.
All right, hold on. Just hold on. I'll call the doctor. Calling Dr. Racy. Dr. Ken Racy.
Yes, Mrs. Jetson, somebody got a pain in the tummy tum-tum?
It's Elroy.
Well, I think you got the idea there. So that science fiction from years ago now is today's reality. And so imagine, what it's going to be like shortly. And as we continue to use it more effectively. So why telemedicine? Why telehealth? We have shortages on the nursing side. We have shortages in some of the physician practices that can be helped with telemedicine. It's a multiplier. I think as we get used to doing more things online, it will include also our, taking care of our health. And as I said to you, in the last 2 years, we've kind of gotten used to that. And I used to say before the 21st century that in the 21st century is just simply going to be the way in which we practice. And indeed, in the 21st century, which is now, it is. And so I created Vesalius Ventures in 2002. And we have invested in a number of different technologies in telemedicine. So it's more than just face-to-face consultation. It is moving data or physiological data, coming from an EKG, for example, to moving it from one place to the other. That is, it also involves robotic surgery. And what you're seeing below, and what we call here our tombstones, which is our any company that we invest in, we show their logos. They show a variety of different uses in telemedicine. So let me, And so let me just talk about a few of those things. So the iPhone has enabled a lot of this to happen. You can get your EKG. In fact, I monitor my EKG on a daily basis with my phone and a device that I just put in my fingers, connect my 2 fingers, and basically is able to get my heart rate and tells me, how healthy I'm doing. In some pharmacies, there are kiosks where you can actually see a nurse and a physician using telemedicine. There are systems that are used at home that you can use telemedicine. And if you look all the way down to the lower right, this is a portable device that we use to go in the fields. So we'll use these in some developing nations that don't have access to physicians. We actually will hand carry that. And this will allow us to not only see the patient, but be able to use that if you're even doing surgery, because this thing is able to not only monitor the patient, but be able to show surgeons what the surgeons are doing on the other side. I also mentioned robotics. So the robotics side of what NASA is involved in telemedicine includes, on the left side, having a robot that essentially is a stand-in for the physician. So the physician can, from his or her office, log onto the robot. The robot face is actually the physician on the other end, and can walk alongside or just go into a patient's room and be able to talk to the patient. And because it's a computer screen, also show the test that was done maybe the previous day. If you go to the lower right, you'll see the Da Vinci surgery robot that's being used for all sorts of things, from heart surgery to prostate surgery. And it is probably the most precise way to do surgery these days. And doing something what we call minimally invasive surgery. So you don't end up with all the big scars, because all you need is just a small window to get inside, say, the abdomen. And then, of course, being at NASA, I had to throw in that we do have robots on orbit too that help us on the outside. We call them robonauts, and they will go out and do spacewalks with their patient. And then lastly, we use gaming to help with behavioral changes. In this particular game, it's called Fuya. It's a food fight that enables students to learn about eating healthy. And so I wish we had time to show you how it works. It's a beautiful competitive game. And the offshoot of it is that the kids in elementary school can learn what foods are good for them. So where are we going? Telemedicine is going to be involved, as I said, in everything. Over the next 10 years, it's going to be incredible. These devices, like the device that I'm wearing, these wearable devices are going to change the face of medicine. And we hope to be in the middle of that as an organization. So that's what's happening on the medical side on Earth. There are a lot of other technology things that are happening. And I think everybody recognizes these logos from Microsoft to Facebook to Apple, and then also looking just a few years ahead. I used to say 10 or 15 years ahead, but even now we're using artificial intelligence. We're talking about quantum computing. Blockchain is being used for all different things in disruptive technology. All of these things, when I look at it now, not with my astronaut hat on or my physician's hat on or my venture capital's hat on, but now with my philanthropy hat on and my concern about where we are in this nation in terms of, are our kids prepared? I have this question that I always like to ask, and I think we should ask ourselves from time to time: are our students prepared for this now? Not the future, but this now. And when I talk to education organizations, most of the folks will say that we're not. If you look at how the United States rates with other countries like China and India, we are lower down on the run in terms of our proficiencies in math and science, and we need to change that if we're going to remain to be competitive. So that started my interest on investing in today's youth. And so currently I run an organization called the National Math and Science Initiative. And our mission is to provide advanced STEM education, high quality STEM education to all students, and particularly those furthest from opportunity. And that means Black and brown students in the inner city. It means rural kids who also have the same issues when it comes to accessing high quality education. So we're on a mission to change all of that. And so we have several programs in which we do that. We're one of the largest providers of advanced placement in high schools across the country, with over 2 million students that have gone through the program. We are involved in professional development to teachers so that we can help them teach STEM courses better, and also help them help themselves in terms of forming communities of chemistry teachers or biology teachers that are national communities in which they can learn from each other. We also have a program where we are trying to tackle the issue of, again, those students that are part of military families that move around all the time. And what we want to do is make sure that they have consistent training in STEM. And then our last program involves teacher preparation. So we have a program called UTeach. In fact, with a partnership with the University of Texas right there in Austin, there's something called the UTeach Institute. And so we've had a partnership that's resulted in us bringing up 45 universities that take people who are majoring in STEM, add a little bit to their school curriculum, and they leave with the ability to teach. And so that's done really well across the country. So you can see 2 million students, 65,000 teachers, over 1,300 high schools that we're involved in with our AP program at 45 universities. So we're serious about this. So my last bit, as we begin to close, and I begin to close, and we can open up for questions, I want to talk a little bit more about the future. And I put this in here for discussion today because if you're following current events, you know that we have a lot of things happening in space. And space is not going to be the final frontier. It is going to be a near frontier for us. And why? Because right now, orbiting above us is the International Space Station. It's been in orbit and it's been growing over 21 years. So some of you on this call may not have been born when this vehicle first went up. And so I think I have to pause and think about that. The other thing that I think you should pause and think about is that going forward, there will be no time in human history that we will not have someone in space. So think about that. This is only one of the platforms that are orbiting above. And with now involvement of commercial ventures like SpaceX and Blue Origin and others, we're going to create this ecosystem between the Earth and low Earth orbit and the Moon that's going to really advance technology in a sense. And many of you on this call will have the ability to not only work at Facebook on Earth, but will be able to work for SpaceX or one of the other companies and one of the other many companies that are going to be developed over the course of the next few years. So I'm really excited about this because instead of having one way or two ways to get to orbit, the Americans or the Russians, we will now have commercial companies that are going to be providing not only ways to get back and forth through low Earth orbit and beyond, but will create this whole new industry in space. So we have to be prepared for that. What happens next? Well, NASA has got involved in a new program looking at what happens when we go beyond the moon. We have actually announced a new program to go to the moon, this time not just to leave plant flags and leave footprints, but to actually build habitats and live on the moon. And that would set the stage for us going on to Mars. That program is a program that's called Artemis. And so this is a artist's rendition of what those settlements might look like on the moon. And that's setting the stage for us to go to Mars. And when I think about this, I really get excited because, as I mentioned, that we're going to be the Martians, given all what we know so far. And you might notice on this slide that there's a little white area down below on the lower pole of Mars. That actually is frozen water. And so we know, and we have found out, that there is water trapped in the soil of the planet. And so where there's water, we can actually use that water to drink. We can split those molecules into hydrogen and oxygen, and we can now create reactors that can provide our oxygen to breathe, and then also provide our fuel for staying on Mars, and then also return to Earth. So anyway, this is my last slide, and I'm going to do like a astronaut physician would do, and to say that if humans explore the galaxy, it will take innovation in medicine to do that. And that knowledge will change the world. It's already changed the world, but the impact is going to be pretty dramatic going forward. And so I want to thank you for listening. I hope that wasn't too much. And I'm going to stop my share here and open up for questions. Let's go over my sheet.
Thank you so much, Dr. Harris, for your presentation. It was so interesting to hear your experiences in space and back here on Earth, helping to improve people's health and also produce the next generation of scientists. So we do have some questions. The first question we have is, what is your favorite story to tell from when you were in space?
Oh, probably been my favorite story. I have two, but I'll tell the first one. And that was not in space, but getting into space. So my first mission, when I got assigned, we were supposed to lift off 8 months from the time in which I got assigned. Some 2.5 years later, because of issues that we had with the space shuttle, our flight got delayed, kept getting delayed. And on that day that they had fixed everything we thought and we were heading to orbit, we got in the vehicle, all suited up and belted in, and at T-minus 5 seconds, the main engines fired, and at T-minus 2.5 seconds, the main engines failed, and one of the engines caught on fire, and so I was on the flight deck, and so we have 2 decks. We have a flight deck with 4 crew members, and then we have a mid deck, which is down below. They don't have windows. We have windows up front. And so I was able to, and I don't know why, I think instinctively used a wrist mirror, because when we're in our suits, we can't look down because it's so bulky. So we have mirrors on our wrists so that we can see the things on our suits. And so I used the wrist mirror to flip it up through the overhead window. And what I saw through the overhead window, remember we're on our backs and the vehicle was sitting up like this, was a hydrogen fire rolling up the hill, or rolling up the side of the vehicle. And I said, oh my God, this is probably going to be the end. At the same time, master alarms are going off and all of that. And fortunately, NASA had seen this before. They put out the fire, and now we're just sitting there. And as I'm sitting there, I realized that we were moving. And so now I've changed my gaze from looking above the window to looking at the commander's window in front of me. And the gantry is moving. It's moving back and forth. And I'm going like, why is the gantry moving? And I realized it wasn't the gantry, it was us. Because the way in which we blast off in the space shuttle, the shuttle is held down by 4 bolts on the aft skirt of the solid rocket motors that holds the whole 5 million pounds, just 4 bolts on each side. Now, they're big, massive bolts. And what we do is that we light the main engines, and those are the main engines on the shuttle itself, on the spaceship, before we light the solid rocket motors. And we do that because we want to make sure they're up and running. And when they're up and running, and we know we have 100%, then we will light the solid rocket motors. So when you light those, that's 1.5 million pounds. It pushes the whole vehicle in 25 feet in one direction, and then something in which NASA calls the twain. So the whole vehicle moves 25 feet, and then normally swings back. And as it swings back through the center, it takes about 5 seconds, and T-0, and you go straight up. In this case, you didn't have that. And so what happens is you go 25 feet one direction, 25 feet the other direction. So we just go back and forth. And it took a few minutes for this to dampen out. You think that was scary? It was. It really was. So that's probably my favorite story to tell. And the second one has to do with opening up the hatch for the very first time and doing spacewalk on the second mission. And that was amazing to see the Earth. I think I failed to share with you. We have to reach a velocity of 17,500 miles an hour in order to stay in orbit around the Earth, which means we go around the Earth every 90 minutes. Get to see a sunset or sunrise every 45 minutes. It's pretty awesome. So imagine being outside of the vehicle as you're cruising across the surface of the Earth at that speed. Get your attention.
That was definitely such an interesting story to hear, and we're very glad that you're safe and that NASA caught the fire super quickly. Another question that came in is from Marion. They're asking, do you have any kind of music you prefer to listen to when you're in space?
I listen to all types of music when I'm in space. I'm partial to R&B, in part because when I was in high school, I played in the band. So I played the tenor saxophone. So I love jazz. And so this was back in the 70s when R&B was very popular, and it's still popular. And so groups like Average White Band, Kool and the Gang, even Michael Jackson came out during that period of time. So those are my favorite.
That's awesome. I love that. So the next question we have is, what did you do in college and grad school to achieve your goal of becoming an astronaut?
So I went to University of Houston knowing that I wanted to be a doctor. So I immediately joined the pre-med club and basically followed all the rules, tried to keep my grades up as possible, as high as possible. Although I had a little dip because I ended up pledging a fraternity called Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity, and I got a little distracted one semester, so I had to make up for it. I'm sure that's not happened to anybody on this call, and but I was pretty focused. And then I went to Texas Tech Medical School and then Mayo Clinic to do my residency. I think my advice is always, do your homework. Figure out what it is, what are the requirements for whatever it is that you need to do. Go in a subject or a task with your eyes open and knowing that it's just not going to be easy, that you're going to have challenges along the way. And in fact, some obstacles along the way. And you can, if you have the stick-to-itiveness, you can get past those and the rewards will be great on the other end. And then the other thing is to find folks that support you. And those are mentors, people that can help you, that you can whine to, that you can, lean on their shoulders, cry to if necessary, but also folks that know your path and know what you have to do and you can get some insight as to the things that you need to do in order to stay ahead.
I think that's definitely some great advice for everybody that's listening. Another question that just came in is this what you were expecting your journey to look like when you first started your career in STEM?
Yes and no. So I would say this notion of becoming an astronaut and a doctor, that was I set out to do and was pretty intentional on doing it. I know that a lot of people will be in college and will go to college and not know what they want to do. And I was not one of those folks. I was pretty like, this is what I'm going to do. But it was after I left the astronaut office that I ended up, thinking that I would go and work for an aerospace company like a SpaceX. They weren't around 20 years ago. And I just kind of fell into venture capital. And I fell into venture capital through a mentor of mine who had a venture capital firm. And we just happened to be talking at the same conference. And he talked about venture capital. And I went, that sounds like fun. So you go and you raise money, and then you invest it in areas that you are familiar with in hopes of having a good return on investment. And he had a good track record. So, you talk about all of the millionaires that he made in his time as a venture capitalist. And I went, yeah, making money sounds like fun. But I think more importantly, as I got into it, working with entrepreneurs, and I think all entrepreneurs, whether they are 20 years old or 65 years old, are always young because they have ideas. And I like, working with people who have ideas about how they can change things and make things better. And in my 20-year history now being in venture capital, to me, that's the most exciting thing. And it was not something that I had planned to do.
That's really interesting. I think it's really reassuring to hear that you don't necessarily have to know what your passion is going into college, and you can find that anytime on your journey. So now a more fun question. What is your opinion on space food?
I hate space food. It's a pretty short opinion on that. The funny thing about it is that NASA spends a lot of time preparing our food. It has to be prepared a certain way in order to last in space. And so it comes in two forms. Temperature stabilized, which means the food is already cooked, it's prepackaged, and then we simply have to heat it up when we're on orbit. And then also freeze dried. So we have some foods where they take all the water out, and that kind of saves the weight of the water. And then we make our own water in space, and so we're able just to hydrate the dehydrated food and eat it. We actually go through days of testing different foods, and we pick the foods that we like on Earth, and they package it for us. But the problem with that is that when you go into space in microgravity, your taste changes, and we haven't figured that out yet. So the things that you loved on Earth, you hate in space. And so what happens is that we end up swapping around with each other or stealing each other's food, depending on what. And so, but, it's okay, but it's not my favorite.
So cool that your taste changes in space. I definitely did not know that. We have a question that's asking if you have any advice for STEM students who are interested in getting involved in a business-related field of science.
Yes, and space science, is that what the question's around?
Business-related, like fields.
Or space business, or just business in general?
I think it's business in general, but you can answer either.
Yeah, I think I'll answer it both ways. I mentioned during my talk what's going to happen in the next few years as we do more and more things in the Earth orbit and beyond. It's going to open up different opportunities. So if you're interested in space, there are going to be business opportunities, lots of business opportunities for you. In terms of business in general, I would say that if whatever you're majoring in, if you want to change that or slant that toward business interests or creating a company, the first thing you should do is get as much education as you can on it, whether it's formal or informal education. Go and find someone that's doing what you would like to do or close to it, so you can get to learn and get some experience. Go out and get experience first on the business side, and usually that comes with working with a large company. I know a lot of people want to go and work for a startup because they think the startup's going to make a gazillion dollars and you're going to be rich right off the bat. But if you do that, then you miss the opportunity to gain the knowledge that you need to really be valuable to that startup. So go and get that experience and that expertise first, and before you jump off in the business, because just jumping off the business never pans out unless you're just extremely lucky.
That's great advice. I think a lot of people forget the business side of STEM fields, so it's great to hear that you can do both. So the next question we have is, do you think the commercialization of space is a good idea? How do you think this would affect the future of space?
Yeah, it is a good idea. If you haven't got that message from my talk this afternoon, it's a good idea. It was interesting. I get a lot of calls from, the media and just people in general. Remember when Jeff Bezos and let's see, who was he competing against? I forgot who the other person was. They were, seeing who could go the highest and that's the tourist aspect of space. And said, well, why are they competing with each other? They're not just competing with each other about who gets to space, whether it's 60 miles or 100 miles above the Earth. It's about the technology solutions that they're developing that's going to enable their companies to really be successful in that new world order, that new space environment that I keep talking about during my talk today. And so there's going to be room enough for everybody, but they are investing those billions of dollars because they see the opportunity in space.
Our next question is about what your experience was like as an African American pursuing space medicine. A couple of the audience members are African American students, and they'd like to know how you overcame any racial barriers in your pursuit, and if you have any advice for other Black students who are interested in medicine or in space.
So the first thing I would say is that we tend to, I think, focus on our differences, and we are to be focusing on the things that make us, our commonalities in life. You should focus on your dream, your ambition, and your goals. But we know the reality is that racism still exists, and that there are people that think certain things of you. There are certain stereotypes, and I think as much as you can, you can't ignore them, but you can't let them interfere in your dream. That's, to me, really important. And make fun of it, make light of it. And I'll use a story that happened to me when I was at Mayo Clinic. I had finished medical school. I had finished my boards. I was a bona fide doctor. I was doing my residency, and I walked into a patient's room, happened to be a white gentleman. And I was explaining to him what his test showed and what the plan was, what his diagnosis was, what the plan was. And I went through all that. And I said, do you have any questions? And he said, yeah, I do. When is the doctor coming in? I said, I am the doctor. So it was an opportunity for me to prove to him that, a Black person can be a doctor and be a good doctor and be at a prestigious institution like the Mayo Clinic. And I think it opened his eyes. At least that's what I hope. And I think as we do that, whether you're Black or brown or Asian descent or Indian descent or whatever your background is, we're all going to have issues that we deal with. People are going to think certain things. Some of those things are not going to be nice, but we have an opportunity, and just doing what we do and being who we are to help them see differently. And that's what my goal is at every encounter.
That's really powerful advice and a powerful story. Thank you for that. So the next question we have is, which of your venture capitalist projects excites you the most, or is there any area that you want to get involved in that you have not yet?
Probably one of the ones that I think really made a difference on our investments was a company that dealt with telepsychiatry. And this may not seem like, this would lend itself to telemedicine, but it does. So we invested in a company they're called JSA Health, which took physicians, psychiatrists, and they basically were beamed into emergency rooms to doctor's offices, providing their services via telemedicine, via consultation. And I remember the first time I went to see the company, I wanted to do my due diligence. So I wanted to go, okay, what is this telemedicine thing? And so I went in with the CEO when he was doing, we call it an encounter, an interaction with a patient. And the patient was a patient who was suicidal in an emergency room. And the ER doctor at the time didn't know what to do. So that's why they consulted this doctor. And so I just sat back and I watched him take this guy, looking at the camera. He walks into the room, and you can imagine he's suicidal, he's paranoid, he doesn't know what's going on. And when he walks in the room, oh, and by the way, his one of his ideations was that he thought that people were talking to him through the television. So imagine him walking in a room with a television screen with the doctor on the other end, and I was going like, I don't know how he's going to get past this. I was saying, I don't know how this psychiatrist can get past this. And he was able, through the airways, to talk him down, get him to sit down in front of that television. And within 5 minutes, it was like the technology was not there and they were just talking back and forth. It was so effective. And that guy's life was saved. And then I became a fan of telemedicine. And so we ended up seeing thousands of patients. We ended up selling that company. Being a venture capitalist, you always want to sell the company. We ended up selling a company to a much larger telemedicine company, and it's in use today.
That's a really great story to hear, and I'm glad that you think that there's a lot of potential in telemedicine, since it's certainly become a lot more prevalent. The last question that we have is about whether you conducted research in space, and if so, if you could tell us more about it.
Yeah, as an astronaut, no matter what your background is, you are responsible for conducting the experiments. On my first mission that was 2 weeks long, we had 91 different investigations that range from having animals in space to growing plants in space. We had a telescope that looked out further into the Milky Way because we're above the most of the atmosphere, and that was fun. We had different types of furnaces in which we used to melt material so that it is able to, so we're able to create new material. So when you, for example, on Earth, when you are mixing two materials, let's say a ceramic with a metal, if you mix the two, because their weights are different, as the material begins to solidify, gravity pulls heavily on the metal, and then the ceramic tends to float. If you go into space and you mix it up while it's in molten shape and you allow it to solidify, it's more integrated. And so what you can do is you can actually come up with a lighter, more and stronger material in space because the molecules align more efficiently than they would here on Earth, as an example. That's why we had the furnaces. On my second mission, we had 41 different investigations, including the investigations that I did outside during my spacewalk where we deployed a satellite. So microgravity allows you to do a lot of different experimentations, a lot of different research that's not going to only help the astronauts and people who live in space, but us here on Earth.
I want to give you a huge, huge thank you for giving us that amazing presentation and for answering all of our questions. We just loved hearing about your career path and all the different ways that you think medicine has and will continue to evolve in the future. Next, we also want to thank all of the Dean Scholars who were part of the DLS committees, who spent countless hours making this event possible. And lastly, we want to thank every single member of the audience who tuned in today. And we really, really hope that you enjoyed the talk as much as we did. And we look forward to seeing you again next year. Ben, did you stop screen?